My name is Alex, and I'm 28 years old. I work in tech and have been living in a bustling city far away from my hometown for several years. It's a life I've built on my own terms, different from the one my parents imagined for me. My family is deeply traditional, rooted in cultural values they hold close to their hearts. They believe in preserving our heritage, and for them, family reputation is everything. Growing up, these beliefs shaped much of what I thought life was supposed to be. But now, as an adult, I've realized that their expectations clash with the life I want to lead. Especially when it comes to Jamie, my partner of 3 years. She's the love of my life, but because she's from a different background, my parents have refused to even acknowledge her existence. This is where the real conflict in my story begins. Jamie is 27 and one of the kindest, most understanding people I've ever met. She's the kind of person who lights up a room just by walking in. We met at work when we were both new hires, and what started as casual conversations over coffee quickly turned into a deep connection. For 3 years, we've built a relationship filled with trust, laughter, and mutual respect. I'm proud to be with her, but for my parents, it's as if she doesn't exist. Every time I try to bring her up, the conversation shuts down immediately. The first time I mentioned Jamie to my mother, her response was blunt. Don't waste our time with someone we'll never accept. It stung, but I thought maybe they'd come around if they saw how happy she makes me. That hope has been fading, though, as their resistance has only grown stronger. Growing up, I always knew my parents had strong opinions about who I should marry. My mom is the kind of person who commands attention in every family gathering, often reminding everyone about the importance of marrying within the community. My siblings never questioned this. They followed the rules, married people handpicked by my parents, and stayed within the cultural boundaries my family cherishes. I always thought I'd follow the same path, but meeting Jamie changed everything. For the first time, I found someone who truly understood me. She didn't just listen, she cared about my dreams, my fears, and everything in between. I thought my parents might soften when they realized how serious we were. Instead, they doubled down, acting as though my relationship with Jamie was nothing more than a phase. Jamie tried. She really did. She made an effort to understand my family's culture and traditions, even going so far as to learn a few words in their language. She'd ask me about our customs and history, hoping to show my parents that she respected where I came from. But every attempt was met with indifference. When we visited my hometown for a short weekend trip, I mentioned her to my parents again, thinking maybe being physically closer to them might make a difference. It didn't. My mom wouldn't even say Jamie's name. It was as if acknowledging her would somehow tarnish our family. I could see how much it hurt Jamie, but she never let it show. She'd always tell me, "We'll get through this, Alex. As long as we're together, that's what matters." I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure how much more of this we could take. The worst part is, I started feeling like I was living two separate lives. With Jamie, I could be myself, relaxed, happy, and open. But whenever I was around my parents, it felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to avoid saying anything that would spark another argument. My parents never said it outright, but their disapproval of Jamie was always there, looming over every interaction we had. Even during simple phone calls, my mom would casually slip in comments like, "We'll start looking for a good match for you soon. It's time to settle down." I'd tell her, "Mom, I've already found someone," but she'd ignore me completely, as if I hadn't said anything at all. It was frustrating, and more than that, it was heartbreaking. How could the people who raised me refuse to see what made me happy? Looking back, I should have seen the bigger storm coming. But at the time, I was too focused on maintaining peace. I thought if I gave my parents enough time, they'd eventually come around. After all, I'd always been the good son, the one who followed the rules, got good grades, and made them proud. Surely they'd realize that Jamie wasn't a threat to our family's values, but someone who added to my life in the best way possible. I tried to focus on the positives, on the life Jamie and I were building together, but deep down, I knew the situation with my parents wasn't sustainable. Something had to give, and I just didn't know when or how it would happen. I grew up in a house where family and tradition were everything. My parents were the kind of people who lived by unwritten rules passed down through generations. My mom was the heart of it all, a strong, opinionated woman who took pride in upholding our cultural values. She always said, "Family comes first, and we must never forget where we come from." My dad was quieter but equally devoted to these ideals. Together, they raised me and my 2 younger siblings to follow a strict set of expectations. Education, respect, and community loyalty were non-negotiable. But the one thing they emphasized the most? Marrying within our culture. My mom had a saying, "A marriage isn't just about 2 people, it's about 2 families coming together." For my siblings, this wasn't a problem. They both married exactly who my parents approved of. I, however, was a different story. From the moment I was old enough to understand their expectations, I felt the weight of their hopes for me. I tried my best to be the son they wanted. I studied hard, got into a good college, and eventually landed a job that made them proud. But when it came to relationships, I couldn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. Meeting Jamie opened my eyes to what love could be, a partnership built on trust and genuine connection. I didn't want to marry someone just because it was expected of me. I wanted to marry someone I truly loved. When I introduced the idea of Jamie to my parents for the first time, I knew it wouldn't be easy. My mom's reaction was instant and dismissive. "Don't waste our time with this." It hurt, but I hoped she just needed time to adjust. That hope was short-lived. Jamie wasn't like anyone my parents had envisioned for me. She came from a different culture, spoke a different language, and had a different worldview. But for me, those differences only made her more special. Jamie wasn't just my partner, she was my best friend. She supported me in ways I didn't even know I needed. When I was stressed about work or struggling with something personal, she was always there with her calm, steady presence. I wanted my parents to see the Jamie I saw, the woman who brought light and joy into my life. But every time I tried to bridge that gap, I was met with resistance. My mom would say things like, "You don't understand how important it is to marry someone who shares our values." I'd argue that Jamie did share my values, kindness, honesty, and respect, but it was never enough for them. Over time, the tension started to build. It wasn't just about Jamie anymore. It was about me standing up for the life I wanted versus the life my parents expected me to have. My siblings, who had always been my closest allies, started taking my parents' side. They told me things like, "You know how mom and dad are. Just go along with it. It's not worth the fight." I felt like I was being asked to choose between my family and the woman I loved. It wasn't a fair choice, and it wasn't one I wanted to make. Jamie, on the other hand, tried to stay positive. She'd tell me, maybe they just need more time. We'll figure it out together. Her optimism gave me strength, but deep down I worried about how long we could keep living in this limbo. One of the hardest moments came during a family gathering. My parents had invited everyone over for a big dinner, and as usual, Jamie wasn't included. I overheard my mom talking to one of my aunts about finding me a proper wife. She said, "He's wasting time. We need to step in before it's too late." It felt like a slap in the face. Later that night, I confronted her about it. "Mom, I'm already in a committed relationship," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Her response was cold and dismissive. "Jamie isn't part of our future. You need to stop this before it goes any further." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she'd made up her mind that Jamie would never be good enough, no matter what. For the first time, I felt like my relationship with my parents might never recover. The situation only got worse from there. Every conversation with my parents turned into a subtle or not so subtle attempt to steer me away from Jamie. They'd say things like, "We're just looking out for you," or "You'll thank us later." But I didn't feel protected or grateful. I felt suffocated. The pressure started to take a toll on my relationship with Jamie, too. She was patient and understanding, but I could see how much it hurt her to be treated like she didn't matter. I tried to shield her from the worst of it, but there was only so much I could do. My parents' refusal to accept her wasn't just an insult to Jamie, it was a rejection of the life I was trying to build. I started to realize that no matter how much I wanted to make everyone happy, I might have to make a choice. Looking back, I wish I'd spoken up sooner. I spent so much time trying to avoid conflict, hoping things would work themselves out, but my parents weren't going to change on their own. Their vision of my future didn't include Jamie, and they weren't interested in compromising. It was a painful realization, but it also gave me clarity. If I wanted to be with Jamie, I had to stand up for us, even if it meant disappointing my parents. It wasn't an easy decision, and I knew it would come with consequences. But deep down, I knew Jamie was worth it. She deserved someone who would fight for her, just like she'd fought for me. And I wasn't going to let her down. The first real crack in my relationship with my parents came during another family gathering. These events were always big affairs. Dozens of relatives packed into one house, loud conversations in every corner, and my mom playing hostess like her life depended on it. I tried to enjoy these gatherings, but they'd started to feel like a minefield ever since I'd gotten serious with Jamie. That day, as I was grabbing a drink in the kitchen, I overheard my mom talking to one of her friends. She said, "We've started looking for a proper wife for Alex. He's wasting time with this girl, but we'll fix it." My chest tightened, and I froze in place. They weren't just ignoring Jamie, they were actively planning to replace her. I wanted to storm in and confront her right then, but I held back, not wanting to cause a scene. That restraint wouldn't last long. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, I pulled my mom aside. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "You're looking for someone for me. I already have Jamie. We've been together for 3 years." My mom didn't even flinch. She looked at me like I was a child who didn't understand the world. "Jamie isn't part of our future," she said firmly. "You'll thank me when you see who I found for you." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe how casually she dismissed Jamie, as if she were some temporary fling. I told her, "I love Jamie. I'm not interested in anyone else." But my mom just shook her head and said, "You'll see sense eventually." I left the conversation feeling angry and powerless, unsure of what to do next. Things escalated quickly after that. A few days later, my mom called me, her tone cheerful like nothing had happened. She said, "We've found a wonderful girl for you to meet. Her family is very respected, and she's perfect for you." My stomach dropped. "Mom, I told you I'm not interested." "I'm with Jamie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But she didn't back down. "You haven't even met her," she argued. "How can you be so disrespectful? This is for your own good." I felt my patience slipping. "No, Mom," I said firmly. "What's disrespectful is pretending like Jamie doesn't exist." That was the first time I'd ever raised my voice to her, and the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, she said, "You're making a big mistake," before hanging up. I felt like I was losing my family, one conversation at a time. As if things weren't bad enough, my siblings started getting involved. My younger sister called me one evening, her voice full of concern. "Alex, you're upsetting Mom and Dad," she said. "They just want what's best for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jamie is what's best for me," I said. "Why can't anyone see that?" But my sister didn't understand. She said, "You know how they are. Just meet the girl they've chosen. It's not a big deal." To her, it seemed like a simple request. To me, it was a betrayal of everything I'd been fighting for. I told her I'm not meeting anyone. I'm with Jamie, and that's final. She sighed and said, "You're being selfish. This is tearing the family apart." Her words stayed with me, even though I didn't want them to. Was I really being selfish, or was I just standing up for myself? The final straw came during a visit home. I decided to stop by for a quick lunch, hoping to keep the peace. But as soon as I walked in, I knew something was off. My mom greeted me with a big smile, which was unusual given how strained things had been. She said, "You're just in time. We have some special guests joining us today." My heart sank. I knew exactly what was happening. Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang, and my mom rushed to answer it. In walked a family I didn't recognize, along with a young woman my age. My mom introduced her with a proud smile, saying, "Alex, this is the girl I was telling you about." I couldn't believe it. They'd set up a meeting without even telling me. It felt like a trap, and I had no idea how to get out of it. I felt everyone's eyes on me as I stood there, frozen. The young woman seemed nice enough, polite and clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but I couldn't play along. I turned to my mom and said, "This isn't happening. I'm with Jamie, and I'm not meeting anyone else." My mom's smile disappeared, replaced by a look of anger and embarrassment. "Alex," she said through gritted teeth, "you're being rude." I looked at the girl and her family and said, "I'm sorry, but this isn't right. I didn't agree to this." They looked shocked, and I couldn't blame them. My mom tried to salvage the situation, but it was too late. The family left shortly after, and the house was filled with an unbearable silence. My mom turned to me and said, "You've humiliated us. I hope you're happy." I left without another word, feeling more isolated than ever. That night, I called Jamie and told her everything. She listened quietly, then said, "I'm proud of you for standing up for us." Her words meant everything to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. My family was furious, and I didn't know if we could ever come back from this. Jamie asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought about it for a moment before saying, "No, I don't regret choosing you." And I meant it. But as I lay awake that night, I couldn't help but wonder what the cost of that choice would be. For the first time, I felt like I was on my own, caught between the life I wanted and the family I'd always known. I tried to keep my distance from my parents after that disastrous visit. Every call from my mom was tense, and I dreaded picking up the phone. But one day, she called me with a tone that was oddly cheerful. "Alex, we're hosting a dinner this weekend," she said. "You should come." I hesitated, knowing how things usually went. "Who's coming to dinner?" I asked cautiously. My mom's response was casual, almost dismissive. "Oh, just some family friends. It's nothing formal." I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I thought maybe it was just a family dinner, a chance to rebuild some kind of peace. Jamie even encouraged me, saying it's good to keep the door open. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary dinner. When I arrived, everything seemed normal at first. My mom was bustling around the kitchen, my dad was sitting quietly in the living room, and my siblings were making small talk. I started to relax, thinking maybe I'd been overthinking things. But then the doorbell rang. My mom's face lit up as she rushed to answer it, and in walked another family, parents, a couple of siblings, and a young woman my age. My stomach dropped. I immediately knew what was happening. My mom greeted them warmly and introduced the young woman as a wonderful match for Alex. My heart started pounding. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry all at once. This wasn't just a casual dinner, it was a setup. My mom had orchestrated the whole thing without even telling me. I felt trapped, and I didn't know how to get out of it without making a scene. The young woman was polite and clearly uncomfortable, just like I was. She gave me a small smile and said, "Hi, it's nice to meet you." I nodded, trying to be polite, but I couldn't bring myself to say much. My mom quickly stepped in, guiding us to sit next to each other at the dinner table. She acted like everything was perfectly normal, as if this was just another family gathering. My dad chimed in, saying, "We've heard so many good things about you." I wanted to scream. How could they do this to me? How could they ignore everything I'd said about Jamie? The whole evening felt like a bad dream. I barely touched my food, and every time I tried to speak up, my mom cut me off with a cheerful comment about how perfect this girl was. I could feel my anger boiling over. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. About halfway through the dinner, I stood up and said, "Enough. I can't do this." The room went silent, and all eyes were on me. I looked at the young woman and her family and said, "I'm sorry, but this isn't right. I didn't agree to this." My mom tried to intervene, saying, "Alex, sit down. You're being rude." But I shook my head. "No, Mom. What's rude is pretending like Jamie doesn't exist. I've told you over and over that I'm with her, and I'm not interested in anyone else." The young woman's family looked embarrassed, and I couldn't blame them. They had no idea they were walking into this mess. I turned to them and said, "I'm really sorry for wasting your time, but I'm not available." They quickly made their excuses and left, leaving my family fuming. As soon as the door closed behind them, my mom turned to me, her face red with anger. "How could you do this to us?" she demanded. "You've humiliated our family." My dad, who rarely raised his voice, said, "Do you even care about what you're doing to us?" I felt a wave of guilt, but I refused to back down. "I care about Jamie," I said, "and I care about being honest. What you did tonight was wrong, and you know it." My mom shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You're throwing everything away for a girl who doesn't belong in our world," she said. Her words cut deep, but I stood my ground. "Jamie is my world," I replied, "and if you can't accept that, then I don't know what else to say." With that, I grabbed my coat and walked out, feeling both devastated and free. That night, I told Jamie everything. She listened quietly, her face a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said, "but I'm proud of you for standing up for us." Her words meant everything to me, but I could see the pain in her eyes. "Do you think they'll ever accept me?" she asked softly. I didn't know how to answer. "I hope so," I said. "But even if they don't, I'm not giving up on us." Jamie nodded, but the weight of the situation was clear. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about us and the future we wanted to build together. I knew things with my family would never be the same, but I also knew I couldn't keep living my life according to their rules. It was time to move forward, even if it meant leaving them behind. In the days that followed, my parents bombarded me with calls and messages. My mom accused me of being ungrateful, while my siblings urged me to apologize and make things right. But what did making things right even mean? Was I supposed to abandon Jamie and marry someone I didn't love just to keep the peace? I couldn't do it. Jamie deserved better, and so did I. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living on my own terms. It was scary and painful, but it was also liberating. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone dictate how I lived my life. Jamie and I were in this together, and that was all that mattered. The fallout from that disastrous dinner was worse than I had imagined. My phone didn't stop buzzing with calls and messages from my family. My mom's texts ranged from guilt-tripping me, "Do you even care about what you've done to us?" to outright blaming Jamie, "She's tearing this family apart." My siblings weren't much better. My younger sister called me and said, "You need to apologize to Mom. She's devastated. She hasn't stopped crying since you left." I felt like the walls were closing in. No matter how much I tried to explain my side, it was like they didn't hear me. I started avoiding their calls just to keep my sanity. But every time I saw a missed call or text notification, that knot in my stomach tightened. The guilt was unbearable, but I knew I couldn't give in. I'd already taken a stand, and I wasn't about to back down. Jamie noticed the toll it was taking on me. One evening, she sat me down and said, "Alex, I know this is hard, but are you okay? You've been so quiet lately." I wanted to tell her I was fine, but I couldn't lie. "I feel like I'm being pulled in two different directions," I admitted. "I love you, and I don't regret standing up for us. But losing my family, it's harder than I thought it would be." Jamie reached for my hand, her eyes filled with empathy. "I don't want to be the reason you lose them," she said softly. "If this is too much, I'll understand." Her words broke my heart. She was offering to step back, even though she didn't deserve any of this. "No," I said firmly. "You're not the problem. They are. And I won't let them push you out of my life." The next day, I decided to face my parents again. I knew avoiding them forever wasn't an option, and part of me still hoped we could find some middle ground. When I arrived at their house, my mom barely looked at me. My dad sat in his usual chair, his expression unreadable. The air was heavy with tension as I sat down across from them. "I'm here because I want to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. My mom didn't respond. My dad finally spoke. "There's nothing to talk about unless you're ready to apologize." I felt my temper flare, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm not apologizing for being with Jamie," I said. "I love her, and I need you to respect that." My mom scoffed, finally looking at me. "Respect? You've disrespected this family by choosing someone who doesn't belong." Her words stung, but I refused to back down. "Jamie does belong," I said. "She belongs in my life because she makes me happy. Isn't that what should matter the most?" My mom shook her head, her voice rising. "You don't understand, Alex. This isn't just about you. This is about our family, our traditions, and our reputation. You're being selfish." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Selfish?" I repeated. "How is it selfish to want to be with someone I love? How is it selfish to live my own life?" My dad cut in, his tone cold. "You're the eldest son. You have responsibilities. It's your duty to put the family first." That word duty hit me like a brick. I'd heard it my whole life, but for the first time I realized how much weight it carried. And I realized I didn't want to carry it anymore. The argument continued, voices growing louder with every passing minute. My mom accused Jamie of brainwashing me, while my dad insisted I was ruining everything we've built. It felt like they were throwing every insult they could think of, hoping something would stick. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Enough," I shouted, standing up. "I'm done trying to make you understand. If you can't accept Jamie, then you're going to lose me too." The room went silent. My mom stared at me, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're willing to throw away your family for her?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked her in the eye and said, "I'm not throwing anything away. You are." And with that, I walked out, feeling a strange combination of heartbreak and relief. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. That night, I told Jamie about the confrontation. She listened quietly, then said, "I'm so sorry, Alex. I know how much your family means to you." I shook my head. "You don't have to apologize for anything," I said. "This isn't your fault. I just wish they could see you the way I do." Jamie gave me a sad smile. "Maybe they will someday," she said. "But until then, we'll figure this out together." Her words gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time, I started to believe that we could get through this, together. But even as I tried to focus on our future, the weight of what had happened with my family lingered. Their words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. There would be more battles ahead, but I was ready to face them. In the days that followed, I went low contact with my parents. I needed space to process everything and figure out what my next steps would be. Jamie and I focused on building our life together, but the tension with my family hung over us like a cloud. Every so often, my siblings would reach out, urging me to make things right. My younger brother said, "Mom isn't sleeping. She's worried sick about you." My sister added, "You know she's only trying to protect you." Their words tugged at my heart, but I couldn't bring myself to cave. I knew that if I gave in now, I'd be betraying not just Jamie but myself. This wasn't just about love, it was about standing up for the life I wanted, even if it meant walking away from the people who raised me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I knew it was the right thing. In the weeks after my confrontation with my parents, life felt strange. On the one hand, I finally felt a sense of freedom. I had stood my ground and made it clear that Jamie was my choice, no matter what they thought. But on the other hand, I felt a heavy sadness that I couldn't shake. My parents had been such a big part of my life, and now it felt like I was drifting away from them. They didn't stop trying to reach me, though. My mom would send me messages almost every day, ranging from guilt-inducing texts like, "You're breaking your mother's heart," to angry ones like, "Jamie is tearing this family apart." My dad's messages were less frequent, but just as cold. "You're letting us down, Alex," he wrote once. Every time my phone buzzed, it felt like a reminder of how fractured things had become. Jamie noticed the weight I was carrying and tried her best to support me. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch, she turned to me and said, "Alex, you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you." Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. "I know," I said, "but I hate that this is happening because of us. You shouldn't have to deal with this." Jamie shook her head. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "We're a team and we'll get through this together." Her words gave me strength, but I couldn't help worrying about the toll this was taking on her too. Jamie was strong, but she wasn't made of stone. The way my family treated her was unfair, and I hated that she had to face it. I made a silent promise to myself, no matter how hard it got, I wouldn't let her face this alone. One day, my younger brother called me out of the blue. We hadn't talked much since the dinner incident, so I was surprised to see his name on my phone. "Hey Alex," he said hesitantly. "Can we talk?" I agreed, even though I wasn't sure what to expect. He started by saying, "Mom and Dad are really upset. They feel like they've lost you." His words hit me hard, but I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "I'm not saying they're right," he added quickly, "but can't you at least try to meet them halfway? This is tearing the family apart." I took a deep breath before responding. "I've tried," I said, "but they won't even acknowledge Jamie. How am I supposed to meet them halfway when they're not willing to move at all?" My brother sighed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just wish things weren't like this." After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. My family felt like they'd lost me, but in many ways I felt the same about them. We used to be so close, and now it felt like we were on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. Jamie noticed I was deep in thought and asked what was on my mind. I told her about the call with my brother and how conflicted I felt. "I don't want to lose my family," I said, "but I don't know how to make them see things from my perspective." Jamie nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe it's not about convincing them," she said. "Maybe it's about setting boundaries and letting them come to terms with things in their own time." Her words made sense, but it was easier said than done. Still, I knew she was right. I couldn't force them to accept us. They had to come to that decision on their own. Setting boundaries was harder than I thought it would be. Every time my mom called, I had to resist the urge to pick up and try to explain myself again. But I knew that every conversation would just turn into another argument, and I didn't want to keep putting myself through that. Instead, I started replying to her messages with short, calm responses. When she said, "You've abandoned your family," I replied, "I'm still here, but I need you to respect my choices." It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. My dad didn't message as often, but when he did, his words were sharp. "You're forgetting who you are," he wrote once. It hurt, but I reminded myself that standing up for Jamie didn't mean I was forgetting my family or where I came from. It just meant I was choosing to live my life on my own terms. Meanwhile, Jamie and I grew closer than ever. Going through this together made us stronger as a couple. We spent our days focusing on the future, talking about our goals, planning trips, and dreaming about the life we wanted to build. Jamie even suggested that we start looking for a place to buy together. "It's a big step," she said with a smile, "but I think we're ready." Her optimism was contagious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely excited about what lay ahead. Even though things with my family were still tense, I knew I had something real and meaningful with Jamie. She was my rock, and I was determined to build a life with her, no matter what obstacles we faced. Months passed, and the messages from my family started to slow down. One day, my younger sister reached out with a surprising update. "Mom and Dad are starting to come around," she said. "They're not ready to apologize, but they're talking about you more. I think they miss you." Her words gave me a glimmer of hope, but I knew better than to get my hopes up too high. "That's a start," I said, "but I need them to accept Jamie too." My sister paused before saying, "I think that's going to take time. But don't give up on them yet." Her words stayed with me. Maybe there was a chance for reconciliation, but it wouldn't happen overnight. For now, I had to focus on what I could control, my relationship with Jamie and the life we were building together. The rest would happen when the time was right. As the months went on, I started to feel the need to confront my parents one last time. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it was eating away at me. Jamie supported me in every way, but I could see the strain the situation had put on her as well. She'd often ask, "Do you think they'll ever come around?" And I didn't know how to answer. It was clear that this couldn't go on forever. I needed to try, one final time, to make them see things from my perspective. I wasn't expecting miracles, but I couldn't leave things unresolved. So, with Jamie's encouragement, I decided to visit my parents and have a calm, honest conversation. I hoped they'd finally listen to me, not as the son they wanted me to be, but as the man I'd become. When I arrived at their house, the atmosphere felt tense, just like it had the last time. My mom was in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact, and my dad sat in his usual spot, flipping through the newspaper. I took a deep breath and said, "Can we talk?" My mom looked up briefly but didn't respond. My dad folded the paper and nodded. "We're listening," he said. I could feel my heart racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I came here because I want us to understand each other," I began. "I love Jamie, and I've chosen to be with her. I know that's not what you wanted, but I need you to see that this isn't about disrespecting you or our family." My mom scoffed. "Then why does it feel like you've turned your back on everything we taught you?" she asked bitterly. Her words hurt, but I tried not to react defensively. I haven't turned my back on anything, I said. I still respect our culture and I'm proud of where I come from. But that doesn't mean I have to live my life exactly the way you expect me to. Jamie is kind, supportive, and everything I've ever wanted in a partner. She's not just someone I love, she's my future. My dad stayed silent, his expression unreadable, while my mom shook her head. You're being naive, she said. Love isn't enough. Marriage is about family, tradition, and responsibility. Jamie doesn't understand any of that. I felt a surge of frustration but kept my voice steady. Jamie understands more than you think, I said. She's made every effort to respect our traditions, even when you wouldn't give her the chance to prove herself. My dad finally spoke, his tone measured but firm. If Jamie truly respected our traditions, she wouldn't be putting you in this position, he said. Why can't you find someone who fits into our world? I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm. Because Jamie is my world, I said simply, and I can't imagine my life without her. My mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. My dad leaned back in his chair, his face etched with disappointment. You're asking us to accept something we can't, he said. It's not that simple. I nodded slowly. I know it's not simple, I said. But I'm not asking you to change everything you believe in. I'm just asking you to see Jamie for who she really is. Give her a chance. That's all I'm asking. The conversation went on for what felt like hours. My mom accused me of abandoning my responsibilities, while my dad suggested a compromise that made my stomach turn. Why don't you keep Jamie as your girlfriend but marry someone from our community? He said, as if that was a reasonable solution. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's not a compromise, I said firmly. That's disrespecting Jamie and everything we've built together. I can't do that. My dad shrugged, as if to say, take it or leave it. My mom added, you're making a mistake, Alex. One day you'll regret this. Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. I realized then that they weren't going to change no matter how much I pleaded. It was a painful truth to accept, but it was also freeing in a way. I had done everything I could. When I left their house that day, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, and a strange sense of relief. I had put everything on the table, and now it was up to them to decide what kind of relationship they wanted with me. Jamie was waiting for me when I got home, her face filled with concern. How did it go? She asked. I gave her a small, tired smile. As well as it could have, I said. They're not ready to accept us, but at least I said everything I needed to say. Jamie nodded and hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Her support meant the world to me, and I knew that no matter what happened with my family, I wasn't alone. We were in this together, and that gave me the strength to keep moving forward. Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on the positives. Jamie and I spent more time planning our future, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. My family didn't reach out, and I decided to give them the space they needed to process everything. One day, my younger sister called me with a small glimmer of hope. Mom and Dad are still upset, she said, but they've been asking about you. I think they miss you. Her words gave me a bittersweet feeling. I missed them too, but I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I hope they'll come around someday, I said. But until then, I need to focus on building my life. My sister sighed but didn't push me further. It wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. In the months after my last conversation with my parents, life began to settle into a new kind of normal. I had come to terms with the fact that they might never fully accept Jamie. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had done everything I could to bridge the gap. Jamie and I focused on building our future together, pouring our energy into things that brought us joy. We started looking for a home to call our own, something that felt like a fresh start after all the chaos. Every step we took felt like a small victory, a sign that we were moving forward, even if the weight of my family's disapproval still lingered in the background. Despite everything, I felt hopeful. Jamie and I had faced so much together, and we were stronger for it. But a part of me still wished my family could be part of this journey. One day, I got an unexpected call from my younger sister. Hey Alex, she said, her voice softer than usual. I just wanted to check in. We hadn't spoken much since the confrontation, so I was surprised. How are Mom and Dad? I asked cautiously. She hesitated before answering. They're better. They're not ready to apologize, but they've been talking about you a lot. I think they miss you. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd missed them too, even with everything that had happened. Do you think they'll ever come around? I asked. My sister sighed. It's hard to say. They're still stuck in their ways, but they're not as angry as they were. Maybe it's a start. It wasn't the answer I was hoping for, but it was something. Thanks for letting me know, I said. I appreciate it. Jamie and I talked about my sister's call that night. Do you think you'll reach out to them? She asked gently. I thought about it for a moment. Not yet, I said. I think they need more time, and honestly, so do I. I don't want to go through another argument. If they're willing to meet me halfway, then I'll be ready to talk. But until then, I need to protect our peace. Jamie nodded, her eyes full of understanding. Whatever you decide, I'm with you, she said. Her unwavering support meant everything to me. It reminded me why I had fought so hard for us in the first place. She wasn't just my partner, she was my safe haven, the person who made everything feel possible. No matter what happened with my family, I knew I could face it as long as I had her by my side. As time went on, the messages from my parents became less frequent. At first, the silence felt strange, almost unsettling. But gradually, it started to feel like a relief. Without the constant pressure and guilt, I was able to focus on the life Jamie and I were building together. We found a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood and spent our weekends decorating it, turning it into a space that truly felt like home. Every little detail, from the photos on the walls to the plants in the corner, was a reflection of us and the life we wanted to create. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew we were moving in the right direction. One evening, as Jamie and I were cooking dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. When I finally read it, my heart sank. "We miss you," it said, "but we can't accept Jamie. Please think about what you're doing." It wasn't the olive branch I'd hoped for, but it wasn't the harsh tone I'd grown used to, either. I showed the message to Jamie, and she gave me a sad smile. "At least it's progress," she said. "They're not shutting you out completely." She was right, but it still hurt. I decided not to reply right away. I needed time to process what the message meant and how I wanted to respond. For now, I chose to focus on the positives, on the life Jamie and I were creating together and the love that held us together. Over the next few months, I continued to hear bits and pieces about my family through my siblings. My brother told me that my parents had started asking about me more often, though they still refused to mention Jamie. "They're stubborn," he said, "but I think they're softening little by little." His words gave me a sliver of hope, but I didn't want to get my hopes up too high. I knew that any reconciliation would be on their terms, not mine. And I wasn't willing to compromise Jamie's place in my life just to make them happy. Still, I hoped that someday they'd be able to see past their expectations and understand that Jamie wasn't a threat to our family. She was an addition, someone who made my life better in every way. Until then, I was content to wait. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that's happened, I feel a mixture of emotions. The journey hasn't been easy, and there are still days when I wonder if my family will ever truly accept Jamie. But I've learned a lot about myself and what it means to stand up for the life I want. I've learned that love isn't just about the good times, it's about weathering the storms together and coming out stronger on the other side. Jamie and I have built something beautiful, something worth fighting for, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. My family may not understand that yet, but I have hope that one day they will. Until then, I'll keep moving forward, one step at a time, with Jamie by my side. No matter what happens, I know we'll be okay. And for now, that's enough.